Censor. Merriam-Webster defines it as to suppress or delete anything considered objectionable. While it may feel like a modern tool of control, the impulse to silence dissent is ancient. One of history's earliest and most infamous acts of censorship played out in 399 BC, in the heart of Athenian democracy, where the philosopher Socrates was put on trial for his mind. Socrates had devoted his life to relentless questioning, challenging the bedrock beliefs of his society and urging citizens to think critically. Yet, his brilliant probing inquiries unsettled the powerful, who saw his intellectual defiance as a direct threat to the established order. He was formally charged with impiety and corrupting the youth. In Athens, offending the gods was no small accusation. The people feared that divine wrath could fall upon the entire city for one man's heresy. But his true crime was far simpler and far more dangerous: daring to think differently. The jury found him guilty, condemning him not for any act of violence or dishonesty, but for the content of his ideas alone, ideas that challenged the very foundations of democratic complacency. Socrates was sentenced to die and drank the fatal poison. He was not the last. Centuries later, a man without sin, Jesus of Nazareth, found himself on trial not for any act of violence or crime, but for his words. He declared, "I and the Father are one," a statement that sent shockwaves through the religious leadership. They feared his influence, his growing following, and most of all, they hated the truth he spoke, that he was the Son of God, the Messiah. For this, they sought to censor and silence him. The same leaders who should have protected him instead called for his death, and the Roman authorities, desperate to maintain order, complied. But Jesus was not killed for any act of malice or evil. He was killed because his words shook the foundation of power. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And for this proclamation of truth, he was crucified. From Athens to Jerusalem, the pattern is clear. Truth is the first target of those who fear it. The censor's tool is not reason, but force, not debate, but silencing. And history teaches us that a society that silences its truth-tellers has already begun to condemn itself. Today, the same tools of censorship are being wielded with renewed force. In the 20th century, the rise of mainstream media promised a new age of information, but instead became a powerful instrument for shaping and often manipulating public thought. Now, in the 21st century, we face the era of digital censorship. Our fundamental right to free expression is under direct assault, even here in the United States. America, land of the free, home of the brave. But what happens when the very act of speaking freely, the cornerstone of our liberty, is systematically undermined, silenced, and censored by those in power?
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms, because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, if you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda, and whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrent.
The First Amendment was not merely a promise. It was a line drawn in the sand, a guarantee that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Yet today, that line is not just blurring, it is being actively erased by a creeping regime of control that operates like a digital Big Brother. It is utterly unconscionable when even presidential candidates are gagged. This is precisely what happened the moment Robert F. Kennedy Jr. entered the 2024 presidential race. YouTube censored him mid-speech, a brazen violation of his First Amendment rights in real time.
5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for.
As Kennedy Jr. stated, the First Amendment was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. There is no need to defend popular speech. Its sole purpose is to protect the controversial, the dissenting, the voice that challenges the status quo. But this sacred right is now under open assault. What began as subtle encroachment is now a blatant public campaign. Our house is on fire. Our democracy is under direct attack.
I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years.
And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies. The referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing.
For the architects of control, like John Kerry, the central challenge is not protecting liberty, but the sheer frustration of not being able to censor free speech fast enough. The tyrants are scrambling, finding it harder to fully extinguish the First Amendment, yet they are relentless in their quest to silence all dissent. And now, this ultimate battle to strangle free speech has arrived at the doorstep of the Supreme Court. The final stand for the voice of America is here.
A couple weeks ago, I went to the argument, and this should frighten us all. I went to the argument in front of the Supreme Court. We had a justice on the United States Supreme Court. This is the big censorship case. It's something this committee spent a lot of time on, where big government pressures, big tech, and big academia to censor speech, not just conservative speech, all speech. That's frightening. And we went to the argument in front of the Supreme Court, and one of the justices said to the Solicitor General from Louisiana, "Counselor, your position has the First Amendment hamstringing the government." That's exactly what it's supposed to do, for goodness sake. So this is about the First Amendment. And a free press is essential to having a robust First Amendment and free debate in our culture. And if you don't have free debate, you can't settle your disputes by arguing and debating. The alternative is frightening.
It began with a virus, or at least that was the narrative we were force-fed. A bat, a wet market, or perhaps a sinister lab leak. The world was brought to its knees, but the pandemic that followed was a masterclass in orchestrated chaos. The official story shifted by the hour. Masks were declared our essential shield against annihilation, until suddenly they weren't. COVID-19 vaccines were peddled as our singular salvation, until healthy people across the globe began suffering blood clots, heart attacks, strokes, and dying inexplicably. All the while, the government relentlessly pushed its vaccine dogma, methodically silencing every doctor, scientist, and citizen courageous enough to demand real answers.
I think one of the worst things that happened in the COVID era is that our own government deliberately withheld information from us, from the American people, tried to propagandize the American people, used the arms and agencies of government to actively censor Americans who dared to question the propaganda, and the whole federal government coordinates with the biggest tech companies in the world to suppress, and media companies to suppress any American who would ask questions about it. It's absolutely disgraceful.
Those who dared to ask questions were swiftly targeted. They found themselves deplatformed on social media, added to de facto digital hit lists, and branded as public enemies, all for refusing to blindly accept the government's ever-shifting narrative and for standing against coerced COVID-19 vaccination. By 2021, a deliberate campaign had crystallized, pinpointing a select group of truth-tellers. Labeled anti-vaxxers, this cohort included not just social media voices and filmmakers, but also board-certified physicians and world-renowned researchers who raised urgent, evidence-based concerns about the safety of the COVID-19 shots. This group was strategically designated the epicenter of dangerous misinformation, a damning claim originating from a report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, CCDH. This UK-based organization wielded outsized, disproportionate influence. The CCDH report's objective was transparent: to isolate, discredit, and ultimately silence these dissenting experts by demanding their widespread censorship. The mainstream media obediently served as its megaphone, amplifying the call to purge these voices from the public square.
So where's the misinformation coming from, and what's being done to stop it?
Only a small number of very organized, very sophisticated, very determined bad actors control the vast majority of the misinformation that you see out there.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms.
The New York Times just published an article showing nearly 2/3 of all vaccine disinformation comes from 12 people in particular.
They say 2/3 of the content is attributable to just 12 people.
2/3 of it were tracked back to 12 people.
A new report says about 65% of all the misinformation online about vaccines is coming from 12 anti-vaccine social media accounts. The Center for Countering Digital Hate calls them the Disinformation Dozen.
They call those people the Disinformation Dozen.
The Disinformation Dozen.
Dubbed the Disinformation Dozen.
The Disinformation Dozen.
The Disinformation Dozen. The Disinfo Dozen.
Among them, physicians, a bodybuilder, a wellness blogger, and the nephew of John F. Kennedy.
They're well-resourced, they're well-financed, they've thought a lot about how they can target their market.
The report says they all have large followings on social media platforms.
The White House praises the work done by the Center for Countering Digital Hate and urges social media platforms to get a handle on disinformation. Center for Countering Digital Hate says when it comes to your health, the pandemic, and vaccines, you need to hear from your doctor, not the disinformation dozen.
The so-called disinfo dozen, branded as the most dangerous purveyors of misinformation, were swiftly cast as the primary architects behind the vast majority of anti-vaccine content online. Among the names infamously listed in this public blacklist were prominent figures like the current Secretary of HHS, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Dr. Joseph Mercola, Dr. Rashid Buttar, Ty and Charlene Bollinger, Sayer Ji, and Erin Elizabeth. These individuals, among others, were singled out not merely as critics, but as enemies of a state-approved narrative.
Being branded as two of the disinformation dozen wasn't a smear to us. It was a badge of honor. It proved that we were telling the truth, dangerous truths that others wanted silenced. It proved that we were over the target.
Guess what? The Epstein files just dropped. And there it is, in black and white, proof that as far back as 2011, Jeffrey Epstein was coordinating with figures tied directly to Bill Gates on multi-billion-dollar funding strategies. Vaccines were the focus. By 2015, the language had shifted from funding to pandemic preparation, with formal agendas, meetings, and discussions about involving the World Health Organization and the Red Cross for global alignment. Then, in October 2019, a closed-door simulation rehearsed a global coronavirus outbreak. When the real crisis went live, the response followed the script perfectly. At the same time, a digital hit list was activated. The Disinformation Dozen. Independent voices, including us, were labeled dangerous for questioning big pharma narratives. That label justified censorship, erasure, and character assassination. Here's the sequence: funding, preparation, rehearsal, rollout, censorship, profit. This wasn't chaos. It was coordination. And the emails prove it. We weren't spreading misinformation. We were exposing their marketing plan before they were ready for us to see it. And for that, they framed us as the villains. They told a terrified world that if you listened to us, you would die.
According to the unified narrative of politicians and the media, the so-called misinformation they disseminated was directly responsible for countless deaths.
People are dying because of misinformation.
Rather than scrutinizing the CCDH's claims, the mainstream media launched a coordinated campaign to ridicule, vilify, and relentlessly mock this targeted group. There was no debate, no engagement with the evidence, just a deafening chorus demanding their erasure. It was a textbook Orwellian purge. Thousands of articles, globally, were published to defame and discredit the Disinfo Dozen, all originating from the single CCDH report. This begs the critical question: what exactly is the CCDH? According to investigative journalist Paul D. Thacker, the CCDH is far from a benign watchdog. His expose uncovered its shadowy financial networks and ties to powerful political operatives. Thacker revealed that the CCDH had funneled over $1 million in anonymous donations through a fiscal sponsor and had retained a professional lobbying firm. At the center of this web is Imran Ahmed, the CEO of the CCDH, a figure whose personal influence extends deep into elite political and media corridors. Thacker's investigation exposes the unsettling reality of how a relatively obscure British nonprofit could orchestrate a sweeping censorship campaign within American discourse, pointing to a labyrinth of dark money and political manipulation.
Not surprisingly, we have since then discovered that George Soros' charity, the Open Society Foundations, was writing checks to the CCDH, including a $250,000 grant in 2024 to silence Americans like us. But that was just the match that lit the fuse. It blew the lid off the entire dark money circus, a web of hidden trusts, foreign billionaires, and political operatives who were building a censorship machine while pretending to be a watchdog. They were not protecting democracy. They were bankrolling its demolition.
They called us crazy for simply quoting the CDC's own studies and the FDA's own website. We weren't sharing opinions, we were sharing their data. And now, years later, virtually everything we said has been validated by science and evidence. The truth they tried to bury is now admitted, even by those who once mocked us. Jesus himself spoke truth plainly. He walked into the temple and exposed the corruption of those who had turned God's house into a marketplace. And for simply speaking the truth, he was deemed a threat. Not to the people who flocked to him, but to the institutions that profited from control. And those institutions responded the only way tyrants ever have, by lying about him and destroying his reputation first, and then killing his body. 2,000 years later, nothing has changed. The tyrants still lie about everything. The CCDH fabricated that 65% statistic out of thin air, a complete lie designed to justify our silencing. They built an entire censorship campaign on a number that never existed.
Here is the ultimate truth. Nearly every claim the CCDH branded as dangerous disinformation has since been validated by science and evidence. Their central, damning statistic that the disinfo dozen fueled 65% of anti-vaccine content was a fabricated figure, concocted out of thin air. Facebook itself was ultimately forced to issue a corrective press release, revealing the stark reality, quote, "These 12 individuals are responsible for just 0.05% of all views of vaccine-related content on our platform," end quote. Yet the media relentlessly perpetuated the false narrative. Why? Because when your objective is the silencing of opposition, facts become an inconvenience, and the truth is the first casualty.
After they plastered us across the entire mainstream media as the disinformation dozen, a local news crew showed up at our property. They were trespassing. They scared our girls. I think Tabitha was 14 and Charity was 9 at that time. And they smugly requested an interview. Now I said yes because they were already filming while they were trespassing on our property. And I knew that if I refused the interview, they would spin it into I was afraid or had something to hide or something negative towards us. So I went ahead and did the interview. The journalist, I use that term extremely loosely, he stood on my property and he could not cite a single specific example of the lies that we were allegedly telling about vaccines at that time. Yet with a straight face, he accused us of being responsible for people dying. What was our crime? Sharing the truth that they were hiding. The COVID shots were dangerous. This is the same truth that the CDC, FDA, and the entire chorus of media parrots are now finally being forced to admit. And that reporter, he never apologized. Of course he didn't. He got promoted. He's now the primetime news anchor on that same TV station here in Nashville. This is the perfect case study in the sellouts in the mainstream media. Willful ignorance and malicious compliance are the fastest way to the top.
Now, the FDA has been forced to add its most severe black box warning to the very shots they swore were safe. Their media partners parroted the lie. This lie was the weapon they needed, a justification for a national censorship campaign that the White House, from Joe Biden down to Jen Psaki at that podium, shamefully amplified to silence us all.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki publicly amplified the CCDH false claims from the briefing room podium, explicitly pressuring Facebook to, quote, "censor these disinformation sources," end quote.
Go ahead.
Just to quickly follow up on the Facebook aspect of this, you said yesterday that 12 people were producing 65% of the misinformation on vaccines on social media platforms. Do you have a sense of who those people are? Are they bad actors like Russia? And Facebook responded yesterday after the press briefing. They say that they've removed 18 million pieces of COVID misinformation. They've connected more than 2 billion people to reliable information. So does the White House find that sufficient?
Clearly not, because we're talking about additional steps that should be taken. And frankly, information that media organizations could decide whether you're going to report on or not. I'm not talking just about the misinformation storyline. I'm talking about these individuals. I'm talking about, how prevalent the spreading of this information is.
Okay, so these 12 people who you have on a list, 12 individuals, do they know that somebody at the Surgeon General's office is going through their profile?
I'm happy to get you the citation of where that comes from. There's no secret list. I will tell you that these are people who are sharing information on public platforms on Facebook, information that is traveling, is inaccurate. Our biggest concern here, and I frankly think it should be your biggest concern, is the number of people who are dying around the country because they're getting misinformation that is leading them to not take a vaccine. Young people, old people, kids, children, this is all a lot of them are being impacted by misinformation.
The big concern, though, I think, for a lot of people on Facebook is that now this is Big Brother watching you.
The phrase Big Brother immediately evokes the dystopian world of George Orwell's 1984. We'll explore that chilling parallel shortly. Immediately following Psaki's directive from the White House, Facebook's leadership demanded an urgent update on the progress of censoring the so-called disinformation dozen. Even President Joe Biden, despite his visible cognitive decline and physical frailty, joined the chorus, dramatically accusing this small group of 12 individuals of killing people.
Of all the misinformation, 60% of the misinformation came from 12 individuals. 12 people are out there giving misinformation. Anyone listening to it is getting hurt by it. It's killing people.
How did a president who often struggled with basic recall become so specifically fixated on the disinfo dozen? The landmark Missouri versus Biden lawsuit finally tore back the curtain, exposing the collusive, unconstitutional relationship between the federal government and big tech to silence American citizens.
The Missouri versus Biden ruling didn't just expose collusion. It tore the mask off the entire operation. This was not just rogue algorithms or overzealous big tech companies. It was a direct, state-sponsored campaign by the U.S. government to silence American citizens. It confirmed the unthinkable. An Orwellian ministry of truth had been built right here on American soil, using Silicon Valley as its enforcement arm to criminalize dissent and dictate the only narrative that you are permitted to hear.
So what came out of the Missouri versus Biden case was astonishing. It showed that the United States government actively engaged in censorship laundering through other organizations to push censorship demands to big tech. In other words, the Biden administration gave a list of names. I was on that list. I was actually named. It's in the discovery documents. Many other people I know were on that list. We were named, and big tech was ordered to deplatform us by name, and big tech complied.
In mid-2024, the landmark Missouri versus Biden case laid bare the truth. U.S. District Judge Terry A. Doughty exposed an almost dystopian scenario of systematic coordination between the federal government and big tech to suppress disfavored speech. He issued a scathing comparison to the Ministry of Truth from George Orwell's 1984, an agency dedicated to controlling information, erasing history, rewriting facts, and crushing dissent. Like the citizens of Oceania, we found ourselves under digital surveillance, our thoughts policed by an unholy alliance. This nefarious collusion has weaponized social media platforms, deploying Ministry of Truth tactics in the 21st century, shadow banning, deplatforming, and algorithmic manipulation to bury opposition. This is not an accident. It is a coordinated, all-out war on your First Amendment rights.
Missouri versus Biden was never really resolved in a way that protects the American people and their right to engage in freedom of speech. And the government itself continues to concentrate the power over online speech into its own hands at the expense of the American people. Whether you agree or disagree with what the government is doing today in all its various activities, from tariffs or ICE operations or wars versus peace or whatever the case may be, you are not allowed to speak your mind in this country without paying a very heavy price. And whatever administration is in power at the moment will make sure you pay a heavy price. And that is not okay. And that is not what our founding fathers had in mind when they wrote the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is designed to enumerate how we are naturally, divinely protected against the overreach of rogue government, whatever future government that may be. That no government has the right to restrict our right to speak, to peacefully protest, to complain to the government about things they've done wrong, or to express our religion, or to engage in freedom of the press. No government has the right to restrict that, and yet they do it every single day under every administration, including the current Trump administration.
Consider one of their most brazen attempts to enforce conformity. In 2022, the Department of Homeland Security attempted to establish its own Disinformation Governance Board. Its stated mission: to police and censor so-called disinformation. Its appointed leader: an individual framed as an information warfare expert.
When TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh!
The move was a chillingly transparent effort to institutionalize censorship at the highest level.
Any government can label anything disinformation, even when they know they're lying. In fact, I would say that no single organization produces more lies on a routine basis than the government itself. Our government lies to us constantly about inflation, about jobs numbers, about what's happening in Iran or Russia or China. We are constantly bombarded with lie after lie after lie. And yet that same government says that, well, it's going to decide what's truth versus what is not allowed. And it will label anything it doesn't want you to say as, quote, disinformation, when government itself is the prime producer of disinformation. Government is a disinformation factory, running 3 shifts, 24/7, 7 days a week, churning out disinformation. And if there should be any warning about disinformation, it should be a warning that's applied to every statement put out by the White House, by the Pentagon, by the FDA, by the CDC, by every government agency, by the ATF, the DEA, you name it. They're constantly lying to you all the time. And smart people know that. They know that everything the government says is a lie. That's why it's laughable that government thinks that it can control truth and it can be the lone source of truth. The same government that once told us that men can have babies, the same government that once told us that Russia would collapse in 2022 because of US sanctions. The same government that is telling us now that America is the greatest country in the world with the strongest currency in the world and the best economy in the world, all lies. And everybody knows it. Everybody who buys groceries knows that we're being lied to about inflation. So if anybody should be held accountable for disinformation or misinformation, it's the government itself.
But the Disinformation Governance Board was swiftly dismantled. It appears the American people had no appetite for their own government appointing itself as the national arbiter of truth. Following a massive public backlash against this sheer absurdity, the DHS was forced to quietly disband the Orwellian project.
We need your help. The government, big tech, big media, they've all colluded to help censor us, to silence us, to shut our voices, to keep us from telling the truth. We filed a massive lawsuit against the censorship industrial complex, but this fight is very expensive. We've already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and we're not even to court yet. If you've enjoyed watching Censored and you want to allow us to continue to share the truth for free, just like we're doing right now with this documentary, Please consider donating to our legal fund. Go to TTAC Legal Fund to be part of this historic battle. We desperately need your help. And remember, when you donate, you're not just helping us. You're helping every doctor, every patient, every parent that's been censored and silenced. This is about the future of free speech for you, for your children. Make no mistake, our case will set a legal precedent here in the United States. Together, we win. They're counting on us running out of funds before we make it to trial, but we will not stop, ever. TTACLegalFund.com. Please donate today and help us win this fight against the censorship industrial complex.
As the discovery process in the Missouri versus Biden case continues to unearth more evidence, the truth becomes undeniable. The so-called war on misinformation was never about public safety. It was a concerted campaign to control the public narrative and silence dissenters. It was, in its purest form, state-sponsored censorship. The most damning confirmation came in August 2024, when Mark Zuckerberg himself admitted that Facebook faced direct pressure from the White House to censor COVID-19 content. A stunning admission of government-coerced speech suppression.
They pushed us super hard to take down things that were true. And they basically pushed us and said, anything that says that vaccines might have side effects, you basically need to take down.
And for a long time, Facebook has faced criticism that it was silencing voices that went against the medical orthodoxy, especially about the origin of the COVID-19 virus. And Mark Zuckerberg is effectively conceding now that criticism may have something to it. In a statement, he says, "I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it," effectively saying that he did bow to pressure from the Biden administration to silence criticism or silence these theories that the virus was somehow man-made. "I feel strongly," Zuckerberg's statement continues, "that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again."
Zuckerberg's admission is an ironic confirmation of what we already knew. The government didn't merely pressure social platforms. It orchestrated a coordinated campaign to transform them into instruments of state-sponsored censorship, directly targeting constitutionally protected speech under the guise of public health.
Zuckerberg's admission is the ultimate ironic confirmation of what years of evidence had already proven. The government didn't just apply pressure, it orchestrated a systematic campaign to transform social platforms into instruments of state-sponsored censorship, directly targeting constitutionally protected speech under the fraudulent banner of public health. Our journey through the censorship machine now turns to Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. He stands as a unique case. The only reason he wasn't included in the Disinfo Dozen is that he had been so thoroughly censored before the pandemic that he barely had a platform left to silence. He was, in essence, the original target of digital suppression.
Yeah, years ago there was an online contest. I think it was the Webby Awards or something like that. And I told my audience about it, and they all went there and voted for me, and I was easily the #1 winner. And then the contest organizers just declared, well, no one could be that popular. It must be bots. And so they deleted my nomination and wouldn't allow me to win the award. And that's exactly the kind of thing that the censorship regime does, is they don't want to acknowledge the popularity of your message or just the accuracy of what you're saying. So they change the rules. They break their own rules to disqualify you, to deplatform you, to blacklist you, or to smear you. That's how they operate.
Mike Adams, known to many as the Health Ranger, a brilliant independent researcher and founder of Natural News. For years, he has challenged the corporate dominion of Big Pharma, and he was openly critical of the COVID-19 shots. Yet, his name was absent from the infamous list. Why, you may ask? Well, since Adams had already been censored into oblivion, there was no need to add him to the CCDH hit list. Mission accomplished. Adams has faced direct targeting by the U.S. government itself. A shocking congressional report titled Instruments of State Power, the Censorship Industrial Complex, revealed that the U.S. Department of State used taxpayer funds to finance both domestic and international fact-checking groups, even partnering with foreign governments to systematically censor American citizens and independent media who questioned any aspect of the official COVID-19 narrative, including masks, vaccines, and social distancing. The report exposes how the government, via the State Department's Global Engagement Center, constructed an entire censorship ecosystem designed to silence lawful speech, demonetize independent outlets, and obliterate First Amendment rights. This federal apparatus, quote, assisted the private sector in detecting speech for moderation, end quote, and actively collaborated with foreign regimes known for oppressive internet laws. So-called fact-checkers like NewsGuard and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue were key players in this orchestrated Orwellian operation. Both entities targeted Mike Adams with relentless fervor. In April 2020, NewsGuard published a hit piece condemning him for the heinous crime of questioning the COVID-19 orthodoxy. Then, in June 2020, the ISD released a 48-page dossier entitled Anatomy of a Disinformation Empire, a transparent attempt to designate Adams and his work as public enemy number one.
So we sued NewsGuard. That lawsuit is still pending, along with the US State Department and Google and Meta and, Facebook and YouTube, all of them, who engage in these malicious lies and smears, malicious blacklisting, for the same reasons as always, to try to silence our voice, silence our platform, because we were telling the truth years before people knew it. Years before it was widely recognized that yes, vaccines have dangers, or that you can reverse type 2 diabetes and in many cases cancer by using natural remedies, natural cures, nutrition, detoxification. These things are much more known now by the American people, but years ago, that was considered very fringe. And, these nefarious, coordinated, well-funded forces like NewsGuard, they were there to try to destroy independent voices, to protect Big Pharma, to protect the CIA and its narratives, to protect the political establishment, whatever it happened to be at that time. So in my mind, NewsGuard is just an extension of the deep state, nefarious, malicious, dishonest force that is trying to silence and censor the truth in order to keep the American people enslaved and dumbed down, ignorant about things that could help them, and basically to force people into harmful therapeutics such as COVID vaccines that were clearly designed as bioweapons to achieve depopulation. So yeah, of course there are a lot of groups out there that are well-funded to try to corral people into depopulation, self-harm agendas. And of course, they're going to silence voices like mine that teach people how to not kill yourself, how to actually live better, how to survive, how to be more self-reliant, how to live happier, healthier, with better longevity, better cognitive function, more joy in your life. Yes, we will always be censored by the establishment and its obedient puppets.
For centuries, the powerful have wielded the machinery of the state to silence the voices they fear. Socrates was sentenced to death. Jesus was crucified. Their crime? Speaking truth to power. Today, that same ancient impulse for control has been digitized, outsourced, and weaponized with terrifying algorithmic precision. But what happens when the silenced decide to fight back, not with mere protest, but with the very legal system designed to protect them? Individuals like Ty and Charlene Bollinger and Mike Adams refuse to remain passive victims of this censorship industrial complex. Instead, they became its most formidable prosecutors. In a series of landmark lawsuits, they have turned the tables, suing the very architects of their silencing. This is the defining chapter of our history, the legal counterattack. The first major legal salvo was fired on Memorial Day, May 27, 2024, when Mike Adams' company, Webseed, filed a monumental federal lawsuit. This was not merely another grievance against the government. This complaint aimed directly at the heart of the entire public-private censorship ecosystem. The list of defendants reads like a who's who of the perpetrators. The lawsuit alleges these entities engaged in a far-reaching global conspiracy. It claims that federal agencies, specifically the State Department's Global Engagement Center, funneled taxpayer money to private disinformation tracking firms. These firms, in turn, allegedly created blacklists and fed them directly to social media platforms, which then systematically censored targeted American citizens. This lawsuit argues it was nothing less than a coordinated state-private scheme to suppress First Amendment-protected speech under the fraudulent pretense of combating misinformation.
We filed our lawsuit on Memorial Day because we honor the memory of those who fought for our freedoms. And we're willing to fight for our freedoms in the courts. And we're willing to take this all the way to the Supreme Court, if necessary. And that lawsuit is still winding its way through the system. And recently, the Department of Justice also threw us under the bus and said that we don't even have any claim with any court in America. So the DOJ isn't standing with us. They're not standing for freedom of speech. They're standing against it. But that's okay. We expected that. We know that we are correct on the merits. We know, we have laid out an exhaustive array of smoking gun evidence of the malicious engineered censorship of my voice and my platforms by the DOJ, by Twitter, before Elon Musk bought it, by Google, by Facebook, by YouTube, and all these other players. And they know what they did, and they're trying to weasel out of this lawsuit. We're not going to let them do that. We're going to keep pursuing this. And it's not about a financial settlement, even though they caused tens of billions of dollars of harm to my companies and my platforms. And also, they harmed millions of Americans who would have otherwise received free information from our articles, from our PDFs and our books and our downloads and our podcasts that would have saved many more lives, okay? So understand, there are probably at least hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dead today who would otherwise be alive if not for the censorship by our own government and by big tech companies. That's why we filed a lawsuit, because we believe in the American right to have access to knowledge. We believe in the First Amendment. We're willing to fight for that, even without any compensation, even at great cost, even if it costs millions of dollars, because we are here to defend the right of all Americans to speak the truth, to speak without fear of being deplatformed, without fear of coordinated government-sponsored censorship or censorship laundering through NGOs and big tech.
The Webseed lawsuit provided the critical legal blueprint, exposing the inner workings of the censorship network. But the legal battle was intensifying on a second powerful front. As Adams' lawsuit targeted the machinery, Ty and Charlene Bollinger launched a parallel and devastating legal strike. On December 16, 2024, their company, Cancer Step Outside the Box LLC, filed an historic multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit of its own. This nearly 400-page legal complaint is a direct assault on what it terms the censorship industrial complex. It names a vast array of co-conspirators, federal agencies like the State Department and FBI, the UK-based Center for Countering Digital Hate, CCDH, and big tech platforms, including Meta, Google, and X. The suit alleges they engaged in a global conspiracy to suppress speech by manufacturing blacklists and coercing platforms into censorship. At the heart of the case is the specific weaponization of the Disinformation Dozen label. The lawsuit alleges the defendants conspired to create and amplify this list, wielding it as a pretext to systematically deplatform the Bollingers' accounts across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube in 2021, inflicting severe reputational destruction and financial devastation.
This case was never just about us. It is about the demolition of your most fundamental freedom protected by the First Amendment. The government, its NGO allies, and big tech didn't just silence us. They colluded in a criminal enterprise to label the truth as disinformation and silence the truth tellers. This lawsuit exists to expose their crime and restore the right of every American to speak freely.
The Bollinger complaint delivers the definitive financial connection, exposing the dark money pipeline that funded the entire censorship campaign. It details how the CCDH, fueled by anonymous donors and a $250,000 grant from George Soros's Open Society Foundations, manufactured the Disinformation Dozen report, providing the government with its very blueprint for digital suppression.
Mike Adams in his Webseed case went after the censorship machine structure. Our case further documents the specific coordinated attack that they launched using that machine. They took a foreign dark money funded hit piece, amplified it from the White House podium and across thousands of media outlets across the world, and they used it to try to erase us from the public square. These lawsuits are not merely complaints. These are our evidence-based counterstrikes.
And so, we return to the question that began this journey. What happens when you dare to speak?
For years, while they were lying, they framed us as the liars. They branded us as a danger to public health for asking basic, common sense questions. The liars called the truth tellers dangerous. Remember that.
What's astonishing in the censorship narrative is that so many people I know, people I trust, people who are good faith people who try to help Americans, were branded as a danger to public health. And that's been used as a slur against myself as well. The real danger to public health is big pharma, lies and propaganda, corporate media following that propaganda, government censorship, violations of the First Amendment. That's the real danger. It was people like myself and others, Ty Bollinger and many others, who were there to help people, to save lives, to inform people, and to ask legitimate questions about the safety, about the efficacy, about was this vaccine subjected to scientific scrutiny? Where are the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled long-term clinical trials? They don't exist. Never did. It was all authorized under emergency use authorization, which means they get to bypass the science while claiming they are following the science. But when we pointed that out, we were branded a danger to public health. Censorship is violence. And those organizations that carry out that censorship, like the US government, especially under the Biden administration, they were waging violence against the American people.
The US government, in collaboration with big tech, has systematically targeted truth and truth tellers. People like us, people like Mike Adams. This censorship continues today. It's an active betrayal of the constitutional principles that it claims to protect. Now, over the past few years, we've been censored, shadow banned, deplatformed, labeled as part of the Disinformation Dozen for many reasons, but initially for one simple factual statement. We were saying that the COVID-19 vaccines had not been proven safe in the long term. They hadn't been tested appropriately. That's true. That statement is no longer even debated. It's now an admitted fact, acknowledged by even the FDA. We were not flagged for spreading falsehoods. We were targeted for telling the truth. Our inclusion as threat number 3 in the Disinformation Dozen list was not a response to any harms that we caused. It was a punishment for speaking the truth. But these are truths that the government, the alphabet agencies, and the media sellouts were not ready to admit. And the apparatus that silenced us remains in place. This is not speculation. This is evidence. These are facts.
Let's be absolutely clear. The story of the Disinformation Dozen is not a story about truth versus falsehood. It is the blueprint. It is the exposed wiring of a new censorship industrial complex. Charlene and Ty Bollinger, Adams, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they weren't spreading misinformation, They were speaking inconvenient, verifiable truths that threatened a trillion-dollar narrative. And one by one, those dangerous ideas about vaccine safety, about natural immunity, about government overreach, have been vindicated. Not by the institutions of power, but by time, data, and the courageous few who refused to be silent. The single most devastating misinformation campaign of our lifetime was not conducted from the fringes. It was broadcast from the White House podium, amplified by a captured media, and enforced by the seamless merger of state power and Silicon Valley's code. They didn't just want to silence dissent. They wanted to disappear a competing version of reality. But a line has been crossed, and a fight back has begun. These lawsuits are more than legal filings. They are the counterattack. They are the American people serving a subpoena to power itself, demanding you will explain your actions under oath.
If they get away with this, if they get away with silencing us with our huge reach and millions of followers, they can and will try to do it to anyone. To a mom questioning a school mandate, to a journalist investigating corruption, to you, your questions will be labeled misinformation. Your dissent will be branded dangerous. We were the test case. You are the target.
This is not a partisan issue. This is about freedom. If the censorship industrial complex continues unchallenged, then anyone who questions the latest official narrative, whether vaccines or a narrative about a pandemic or cancer or any future crisis, will be at risk.
Importantly, if we don't defeat the censorship industrial complex, this weaponization will be turned against every American sooner or later. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a liberal or an independent. Sooner or later, the system will come for you. Because sooner or later, you will utter something that offends those in power. Sooner or later, you will stumble across some kind of fraud in maybe, daycare center funding, or fraud in a science paper, or fraud in an industry, or somebody committing fraud to defraud the government of grant money for climate change research or something like that. You'll discover something and you'll want to speak out about it, and you will find that you are targeted by the censorship industrial complex, and they will take away your right to exist online. They will take away your voice, your channels, potentially your income and revenues. They'll take away your ability to bank. You can be debanked because of what you speak here in the United States. It's happening right now. Another prominent influencer was debanked just the other day. It hasn't ended. Censorship is not over. It's alive and well here in America, and it's supported by our current government administration.
Censorship is the disease. Freedom of speech is the cure. They expected us to be silenced and to retreat, but they were wrong.
The disease is censorship. The cure is freedom of speech. And we are the cure for freedom of speech in America. We, those of us who stood firm, those of us who paid the price to tell the truth without compromise, because we stand for something. We are the trailblazers who are working to defend America against being overtaken by the Orwellian censorship regime that wants to silence and control your speech forevermore. So support us, and you free yourself from an Orwellian future.
We're going to fight. And we're fighting not only to restore our voices, we're fighting so that yours can never be taken away by a rogue government. This is about preserving the U.S. Constitution and our God-given right to freedom. This is for the future of our children. This is about the Bill of Rights.
The First Amendment doesn't protect the free speech rights of the government. It protects the free speech rights of the people against the censorship of the government. Even then, our government uses fake fiat printed currency to fund psyops and propaganda efforts to spew its own malicious disinformation onto the American people for nefarious purposes, to manipulate, to control, to exploit, to deceive. The government does that every day. The corporate media does that every day. Big tech and big pharma do it every single day. The only voices of truth in America are independent voices. that refuse to go along with the censorship industrial complex. Voices like my own and others who were named part of the disinformation dozen, who were singled out specifically because they were willing to tell the truth in a time of great deceit.
Telling the truth in a time of great deceit is the most revolutionary act a free people can commit, because tyrants do not fear armies, they fear witnesses. When we refuse to be silenced, we become the living proof that the light still shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
From the hemlock given to Socrates to the cross, to the crosshairs of a digital blacklist, the pattern of power is ancient, but so is the human spirit that defies it. The targeted have done something revolutionary. They have refused the role of the silenced victim. They have become the hunters. They have seized the apparatus of the state, its courts, its laws, its constitution, and turned it against the architects of the new ministry of truth. The battle is joined. The discovery has begun. The depositions are pending. The censors are now the defendants. They censored the speech. Now they must defend the silence. Find the truth. Join the resistance. Visit censoredfilm.com.
Thanks for watching. Now you know our story. Now you know the story about how the US government, big tech, the CCDH, big media all colluded to censor our voices, to silence us from speaking the truth about COVID-19 vaccines, cancer, medical freedom, and your constitutional rights. And they didn't just censor our content, they tried to destroy our livelihood. They tried to intimidate us into silence. They tried to silence you. They tried to make sure that the masses never heard these truths. But we are not backing down. We have filed a massive lawsuit against the censorship industrial complex for violating our constitutional rights to freedom of speech. But here's the reality. This fight is very expensive. It's very, very expensive. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we haven't even gotten to trial yet. We cannot do this alone. Charlene and I literally have invested everything we have into this fight. Literally. Now, we need an army of Americans that love freedom to stand along our side. And that's where you come in. If you've enjoyed watching Censored, if you want to continue to help us to share these truths absolutely free, which is what we're doing right now, then please consider donating to our legal fund. Right now, you can go to ttaclegalfund.com and become a part of this historic fight. We need your help. And remember, when you donate, you're not just donating to us, you're donating to help everyone who's been censored by these tyrants. Every doctor who's been deplatformed. Every parent who's asked questions and been castigated for it. Because make no mistake, our case will set legal precedent here in the United States. This is bigger than us. This is about the future of free speech in America. Every dollar allows us to continue this fight against the censorship industrial complex. They're counting on us running out of money before this makes it to trial, but we are not going to quit, ever. Every donation sends a message that we will not be silenced. Together we can and we will win this. Thanks for your support. God bless you. Go to ttaclegalfund.com right now and make your donation. Thank you.